Hi, it's Janet Fitch, and if it's noon on Wednesday, this must be Writing Wednesday, where I answer your writing questions. Um, if you have questions about the writing life, craft questions, emotional breakdowns, whatever it might be, feel free to contact me. You can leave questions in the comments, or if you want me to design a Writing Wednesday around your question, you can send me a question at on my website, janetfitchwrites.com. And I have been on a 2-month journey where I've been reading my new novel, first draft, finding my way to understanding what the novel's about so that I can complete the draft or start, you could call it, that would be second draft probably, starting the second draft, or at least completing the first. Until you read it, you often, for me, until I read it, I don't know really what a novel is about, because I create a lot of characters and I create a lot of scenes, a lot of relationships, and then I have to weigh, like, what is it that I care about? What is this thing about? Hi, Lewis. Hi, Jeffrey. It feels nice to be home. I was surprised. I thought I would really hate having to re-enter my life and, catch up on bills that I have not paid because I was away, and, minor disasters averted. So, but I was really surprised that it felt good to be home, that, you set up your house the way you like it. It is an expression of yourself, and when you come back to it, instead of looking at the flaws and I'm sick of that, you see it as it is, as a kind of comforting, stable place for your imagination. Lewis asks, where did I go for the summer? I took a long driving trip up to Canada, and then some friends of ours in Canada hosted us for a couple of weeks, so I could just sit down and read my work from front to back, and kind of loosen the bonds of obligations and so on. Hi, Gloria. And be able to kind of address my work in a fresh way. I'm somebody who really kind of needs those windshield wipers of travel to better get a grip on things. I get too distracted. And when I'm really trying to concentrate on something like a whole draft of a book, getting away from obligations and stuff, really, really important to me. So today I am going to be doing Writing Wednesday on using real people in your fiction, especially if you write historical. I have a question from Elaine, who is here today. And Elaine's question is, okay, dear Janet, I heard you present at the Community of Writers several years ago. Oh, that's what started my tour, as I was up at the Community of Writers teaching for the first time in real life. It was great. Nobody got sick. It was nice to see people in the flesh again and do workshop. I teach these weekend intensives, which are kind of informationally intense, but to sit in workshop with people and go over someone's manuscript is something that I haven't been able to do for a couple of years. So it was really fun, and then I headed north from there, because Tahoe is already 2/3 the way up the state, and it's pretty wild out there, fires and whatever, but as we went far north, it calmed down a bit, and that was fun. Anyway, I heard you present at the Community of Writers several years ago. I was just beginning a novel about a young Jewish woman in the Russian Revolution in the Kiev region, and had started reading The Revolution of Marina M. That was my first Russian novel, and has now finished her novel and getting ready to send it out. Okay, but she's just finished Chimes of Lost Cathedral, the second volume of the Russian book, my Russian book, and I'm absolutely awestruck. Thank you. Brilliantly written, amazing story about the early years of the Revolution, telling the history of that turbulent period via the perspective of the poets and writers who longed for the success of the Revolution as well as their own literary success, and dealt with their despair and disappointment in different ways. Love the parallels between there's an orphanage that my character gets a job at, and the poet's house, the House of Arts. So these are things that go on in my novel, Chimes of Lost Cathedral. The orphans both save and bring grief to Marina, as do the poets. Yeah, well, people who are vulnerable, affect you in many different ways. I'm a newcomer to Writing Wednesday, so welcome. So I'm not sure if you've addressed this. No, I haven't. I am fascinated, stymied, struggling with the use of real well-known characters, like in my novel, Bloch, Gorky, Mandelstam, Biely, etc., and the use of their actual words, poems, and fictional dialogue. I am particularly interested in your rendition of Gorky, who plays a big part in Chimes of Lost Cathedral, the second book, as he plays such a pivotal role in advising Marina in her moral political dilemma. Was his counsel based on something he actually wrote? Moises Segal, Mark Chagall, plays a key role in my novel, but like Gorky, he never actually knew my protagonist. Though I have read a lot about him and by him, I am wrestling with putting words in his mouth. It takes chutzpah, and I'd love to know how you met that challenge. Many thanks to considering my question and your beautiful novel. Loved it, even after 700 pages, didn't want it to end. Very cool. Okay, so the question here is, how do you countenance using an actual historical figure in your novel in a speaking role, not just as background? You walk by somebody at a party and, oh my God, there's Truman Capote, but actually having Truman Capote as a walking, living, speaking, thinking character, part of the story. And that's a very different thing than just having somebody as a walk-on. My character lived in that book, kind of a big dorm for writers that was established by Gorky. Really, he saved the Russian intelligentsia during the revolution, single-handedly. Got the government to agree to let housing them and giving them the right to have rations. And so Gorky plays an active role in the novel, as does in Chimes of Lost Cathedral, as do many of the other poets of the time. And how do you have the chutzpah to actually write these people as characters? I read a lot of their work, and I read a lot of autobiographies of other literary figures who then describe incidents with that person. I read not only their work, but I read contemporary, diaries, journals, memoirs that have their relationship with these people. So that when I went to describe them, I had a feeling about them. I had seen them in social situations. I had not only read their opinions and read their essays and read their, sometimes their journals, but I'd also seen them in action through other people's eyes. And I got a feeling of what kind of people they were and how they would react. Gorky was such a hub, such a center of intelligentsia life during the revolution, especially during the last 2 years of the revolution, when when the House of Arts was established, and he was really protecting the writers and the scholars and stuff. That he was sort of the conscience of the time, of the intelligentsia, and he, like my character, was both believed in the revolution, believed in the ideals of the revolution, but was also able to see that what was happening was not really what we had hoped for, that you can't just say, well, that's not what I hoped for. You have to try to do something to turn the boat, and that was what Gorky was doing. So I just felt that he was somebody that everybody wanted something from this guy. All he did was field requests. Save my husband. He's in, the so-and-so scholar, professor, journalist, writer, artist. He's in, the Bolsheviks have him in jail. Can you get him out? Can you do something? And he had a very difficult position, but everybody knew him. Everybody knew him. It was a very interesting position vis-a-vis all these other people. But I had a feeling of them from reading other people's memoirs in which they appeared, other people's poetry. Tsvetaeva had an affair with Mandelstam, and so she wrote about that, and I believe his wife wrote about that, and she wrote, she wrote poems about him, and I just got a feeling for that guy. And I seeing him in other people's memoirs, seeing Akhmatova, not only from her own point of view, but in her biography, and then other people's memoirs of encounters with her. So when you are using real people, say Chagall plays a key role in your novel, then it's interesting to read the memoirs of people who knew him. And maybe that's not what the memoir's about, particularly, but he appears, and then how was he? How did that person perceive him? What did they talk about when they spoke? It gives you such a picture. So you take these kind of fractured, three-way mirrors of everybody's take on everybody else. The Russian intelligentsia was very small, and everybody knew everybody. So it's a real house of mirrors. You can see what did Berberova think of Gumilev, what did Tsvetaeva think of Akhmatova, you get these people from all sides. And Gorky, in particular, wrote a great deal of nonfiction. He wrote about Tolstoy. Probably one of the best portraits of Tolstoy ever was Gorky's. Gorky's take on Chekhov, so acute. That guy was psychologically acute. But his position of walking the tightrope between the Bolsheviks and the intelligentsia, and fully aware of what the failings of the Bolsheviks were, while trying to keep them from, tearing the world apart, tearing the Russian civilization down to the ground, and fighting like mad to keep that from happening. Only Gorky could have done it. So I needed him in an historical novel to be a living character. How do you get the chutzpah? You just do it. I think the closer it is to our time, the closer it is to people who have living relatives and what your portrayal of them is like, the more kickback you're going to have. But not as much as nonfiction people. I think Chagall, many, many, many wonderful novels have been written about famous artists as living characters. There's the Irving, there's The Moon and Sixpence about Gauguin, and there's a giant one about Van Gogh. There's one about Michelangelo. So yeah, you just have to really get a feel of the texture of that person's thought. If they're in a foreign language, in some ways you're better off because you can use translations of their work. Otherwise, you're paying then you pay the translator. But if you use their work, then you're having to also deal with copyright issues, depending on how long ago it was. But it's just like inhabiting another person is what we do in fiction, is we inhabit another person, we create a set of traits, and we walk into them. In this case, it's more detective work because you have a real person who behaved a certain way and said certain things and had certain problems that you're giving life to. Koim Tobin has written about using literary figures as main characters. He wrote The Master about, The Master was about Henry James. The Magician was about Thomas Mann. And he wrote one about Dostoevsky as well. So, you might I'm sure you have taken a look at these. So yeah, how do you have the, do I dare to eat a peach? Do I dare to part my hair behind? I can see how you think it might be quite a lot of chutzpah to be Chagall or to have him walking around in your novel talking. But if you've read a lot about him, you start to see how he would see something, how he would think of something. Was he an impatient man? Was he a compassionate person? Was he a loving person? Was he cantankerous? Was he superstitious? He was a Jewish man, 1911, Kiev. What kind of movements was he involved in? What would be a common superstition among his class, his socioeconomic group, his, how I hate to say how Jewish was he, but how Orthodox was he? How religious was he? You can get a lot out of his dreams. Look at those paintings. Those are dreams, aren't they? It wasn't a lovely world that he lived in, and yet those were lovely paintings. I feel him as probably a pretty gentle person, living through extremely upsetting events at times. Why not let him speak? I don't think anybody's gonna say, oh, he wasn't like that. I think that you're going to, I think you've done it. You're just worried about it. You've read a lot about him and by him, but wrestling putting words in his mouth. Well, see, that's the difference between a historian and a novelist. An historian never puts words in someone's mouth. They never write a scene, a live scene, where characters speak unless they actually have a transcript of what was said. But as a fiction writer, your whole purpose is to imagine live scenes, and then the person has to speak. And you have to have a really good idea of what their take would be on things. I passed my manuscript, my Russian manuscript, to some very knowledgeable, mostly translators, who understood that period and were familiar with these characters, these historical figures, and nobody, said, "Oh, Bloch wasn't like that." People are like, "Oh, I want to read about Bloch. Oh my God, he's in that scene." They get to see their favorites walking around and saying stuff. It's very exciting. And Karen says, "I have my grandfather's testimonial. I think that would count." Well, if it's based on your grandfather, absolutely. It's more, are you getting that person in the round? Like, that's the reason you're writing fiction. Are you getting them in the round? Do you understand what their feelings about sex would be? How would they be, in a romantic situation? How would they be, in a conflict situation? I knew, like, I wrote a scene, more than one scene, but I wrote a scene where my characters, who are all fictional, the inner circle of my novel are all fictional characters, but the secondary characters I've actually used. I think Gorky is probably the most prominent, but they're in a room, and in a billiard room at the House of Arts where they all live, and Mayakovsky has come to visit, and Mayakovsky was sort of antagonistic to the House of Arts, which he felt was kind of bourgeois. It was in a beautiful old building with no heat. This was not luxury. This was like caveman stuff. But he saw them as being, their poetry was more formal, their background was intelligentsia, as was his. But he took it upon himself to represent the proletariat, be the voice of the proletariat. And it was a very funny scene to write, because I also know that Mayakovsky was germphobic. He had a lot of stuff that didn't quite match his the bombast and the posture of his writing. So that was fun. And then I have my characters are like watching this guy and commenting among themselves what they're seeing. It was fun to write. So anybody else having interest in using real people in their fiction? It always is a little nerve-wracking to do it for the first time, but then you enter them. And if you have a really good sense of who they are, what class they're from, what interested them, what they were afraid of, what they were like as a lover. I had the advantage that these were all writers. So I've read their poetry, I've read their fiction, I've read their... and then this whole house of mirrors of the related memoirs. I think we've all read things with famous people in them. Those Colm Toybin books are an interesting example of that. Many people, T.C. Boyle uses famous real people in he did a novel about Frank Lloyd Wright that was very good. He did one about, I don't know if you could say Kellogg, one on Kinsey. These are historical figures that he made live. You know, it's done all the time, and they're all out there. Anybody have a favorite work with a historical figure as a major character? I mean, it's very popular in historical fiction. I think that, you know, the whole project of fiction is the assumption that one, oh, Rick says E.L. Doctorow did a lot. That's right. Oh yeah, I forgot about Doctorow. The, you know, fiction is all about the human ability to imagine other people's lives. And it's even more important now than ever, because there's a fair amount of people in our world today who don't really see other people as real. They see themselves as real, and other people are kind of like cardboard cutouts. They don't really feel that other people have complex inner lives as they do. You know, you see somebody like shouting at somebody, you know, who's making their coffee, and it's like, that's a real person, dude. That's not just somebody who's in your way. So I think fiction is a counterweight to that, and it shows us, yes, people have, you know, fascinating internal lives, and they complex. Everyone has a world inside them, and that's a very important thing for people to get under their belt. Jamie, hey Jamie, another wonderful writer. Jamie Cat Callan asks, I wonder if we can get into trouble using a historical figure as an antagonist. You mean by, you know, that their family might object to the portrayal? Well, it should be based on who they, you know, on real life. If you're using real characters, if a character had a tendency to undercut people, you know, you could see from the memoirs of other people at the time that this person was a souse or a vindictive person, and then they're vindictive or, you know, horribly drunk and doing something embarrassing. That's what they're, you know, that's who they were. You know, you don't have to whitewash people just because they have, you know, errors. No, you probably can't get into trouble using a historical figure as an antagonist, unless it's contrary to who they were. You know, they were actually really kind of a nervous, sweet person, and you've portrayed them as, you know, some big, you know, sex god or something. It's just like, no. So the only point in using them is because of who they were. And that's what you know, that's how you would use them. So Victoria, hi Victoria, tuning in late. I'm using a local historical figure, sort of nervous about her relatives not liking the book. Right, you're not nervous about her relatives liking it. That's really interesting, because the more local and contemporary it is, the more you're going to have people who feel they own the story, you know, and maybe they want to see their relative portrayed, you know, as a local saint, and maybe you're not portraying them that way. You might hear something from them, but you're trying to be as honest, and you know, as an honest historian, you know, that you're not making stuff up. You are making stuff up, but that it is part of who they were. Certain people will object, and certain people will be glad that you've given life to them and you've resurrected them and brought them into the public eye. Yeah, but I can see that you're nervous. Is it a is it the main character, or is it a major character? The local historical figure. I mean, look at Elroy. I mean, he uses all kinds of people in a really very negative way, and he just deals with the splashback. I think that the sensitivity with which you depict them will be appreciated. It's like, wow, oh my God, my uncle was in that. Let's see. The other Boleyn girl, is that the same thing? Yeah, any historical figure, when the novelist embodies them. I mean, look at Wolf Hall. I mean, it's all historical figures, mostly. The major characters are major historical figures that Hilary Mantel did meticulous research. And then imagine, how would Thomas Cromwell have been? He was known to be a wonderful family man. He was known to be very canny in his handling of the powerful figures that he interacted with. Well, what would that look like in a room? What would that look like over this subject? Yeah, the other Boleyn girl would be the same thing. Elaine said, it's just that your Gorky advice to Marina was so crucial to her development and the plot. Yeah, there was especially one scene where she had a terrible dilemma. And the great man the wise man in her circle was Gorky. And so she goes to Gorky and she has a terrible dilemma. And she lays this out to him. And he was such a realist, and he was a very brave man. And I just didn't see him telling her anything that would just make her feel better. I think he would respect her dignity and lay it out as he saw it. It wasn't in a harsh way, but it was in a way that respected her choice, respected her dignity, respected her as a moral unit, as a thinking moral figure, as people in that in a situation of a revolution, constantly asking themselves, what is the right thing to do? What is the right thing to do? And the more chaotic and challenging the situation, the more it really calls on you to ask, who are you? Who are you? And are you up to doing this? The thing that the hard thing, the thing that isn't the first thing you might think of doing, the thing that it's like, that's the real thing that you should be doing, but do you have the nerve to do it? Sometimes somebody you trust, like the Gorky figure, there was no one else in her circle that she could even confide in at this point. But Gorky rode that line so bravely for such a long time that it was a natural person. So Jamie says, the character is based on the Chancellor of Germany with a Nazi past, so I have free reign. Oh, that's interesting. The Chancellor of Germany with a Nazi past. Well, you never completely have free reign. You're always conforming to who they were. So you're always doing that research. It's not just making it up, unless you've made up a character like that. But you're saying this is an actual historical figure that now you're embodying. I think that you always have free reign in a certain way, and you always have a responsibility to who the character actually was, both ways. And let's see if there's anything else I can tell you. Victoria, this is the local historical figure. I found recordings of her telling academics about her union work. So look at university libraries for that stuff, really valuable. Oh, any kind of recording, any kind of diary, they kept journals, they often wrote articles. And then anybody who wrote about them, how they were seen by others, is like a good double check. But very valuable. I used, speaking of union, one of the characters in Chimes of Lost Cathedrals, Emma Goldman, who was a notable anarchist, and comes on the scene, and I have her with Gorky. My character meets her at Gorky's, as everybody met everybody at Gorky's. And I was lucky in that she wrote volumes about her life. My Life by Emma Goldman, and quite a life. And I saw many of these people that I was writing about through Emma Goldman's eyes, which was like a whole different story. And then, she writes about meetings with these people. She was a really good biographer, autobiographical writer. And those books were really, really helpful. So yeah, your university library is absolutely the place to go. And JSTOR, which is the database for historical writing, and for the journals, the Journal of, Russian Studies, or the Journal of whatever you're using. There's a lot of information in JSTOR. It used to be you could only get it through your university, if you were affiliated with the university, or your local library. The LA Public Library that I'm a member of, you can go through the library portal into JSTOR and use it there. Invaluable. And now JSTOR is allowing the public to use it. So it's J, the letter J, capital STOR. And then you're able to get what a lot of, not the books, but the articles in the academic journals online. And you can get up like to 200 just as a member of the public. So that's new, and that made a big difference in my research. So here's a question. Would historical fiction mix well with horror romance? I don't want to oversaturate the story I'm writing. I can see historical horror romance, set in the 19th century, 18th century. Sounds like a good time to portray. And, if you want to make somebody a werewolf or something, it's kind of interesting. Oh, what if, Lord Byron was a werewolf? That's fiction. That's the great thing about fiction, is that you can do that. I mean, it's going to be harder to make, the mayor a werewolf. I mean, contemporary But you could do that too. Actually, the the far-fetchedness of it helps the reader remember that this is fiction. Sometimes when historical fiction violates what actually happened, many people don't know anything about the subject except what they're reading, and they will mistake this fiction for what actually happened. And that I don't like that. I was a history major. I am so careful with my history. I do not like to violate it at all. So when it was the problem, say, with Lincoln, the Spielberg Lincoln, where they have all the states that vote against whatever it was. I don't even remember which was it, to go to war, or to ratify the emancipation, and then they have one of the states or four of the states actually voted for it, and they made it unanimous in the film, and it was historians were really upset, because often the only exposure that people have to the subject is going to be that fiction. And so now people think everybody voted against it, whereas in fact I think there were four states, including Connecticut, that voted to ratify. So I'd say be careful. So Lewis says Forrest Gump. Many people think it's history. Yep. And Sayward says, I'm the same way with historical fiction for exactly the same reason. Yeah. Don't violate what happened unless it's sort of a dream environment. I even have trouble with kind of these mashup shows where they have people in period clothes and it's supposed to be Catherine the Great or something, or Regency England, and it's just like, no. I mean, these are real things, really happened, There is such a thing as reality and history, and I prefer that people respect that. But I'm a realist. I think that's my problem. I am a realist. If you're going to be a surrealist, then it's a surrealist. Yeah, it's Catherine the Great walking around with a golf club, whatever. Okay, well, is there anything else I can talk about this? It's an interesting subject, of how we can enter somebody else's body and walk around. I mean, that's what fiction is all about. But historical fiction using real people, or even contemporary fiction using real people, just make sure you know enough about them that you can walk in their shoes. Alternative history. Here's a question. Sayward asks, alternative history is iffy for me. I want to appreciate it, but my historian size says no. I think if you're going to write alternative history, you have to hit it really hard. You have to be very clear that you are walking through the looking glass, and this nothing that is going on actually happened. Make sure that it's really clear. But yeah, I have a trouble with it. It's like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. It's some kind of somebody's fantasy. I don't know. I enjoyed the movie, but I actually remember the Manson family and what happened with them, and I think they are so much more fascinating than what happened in the end of that movie. That's why they have a lasting impact. It's not because somebody fried them with a flamethrower. That's just a filmmaker's solution. So Jeffrey has a question. oh, what's the best way to contact me is through my website, janetfitchwrites.com. All right. Well, here we are, having exhausted another topic of writerly concern. I hope that your writing goes well, and in the meantime, write a lot. You can always throw something out. Okay. Bye.